What up, artists? My name is Dwayne Jones. I'm the creative director and founder of a lifestyle brand called Art Pays Me. This is the Art Pays Me podcast, and I'm passionate about finding ways that people like you and me can make a living for ourselves off of our creativity. And, maybe we can make the world a better place at the same time. Let's get into it. Welcome to Art Pays Me. Today we have Andrea Tsang Jackson. So, Andrea, thank you for coming to the show. I've been following you online for a while, and I really like just the clean, crisp, like very, I don't know, like you have a very bright sense to your work, and it always feels good to look at it and experience it, and it's exciting to finally get to talk to you. So, what is it that you do?
Hi, Dwayne. Thanks for having me today. I'm a textile artist, working mainly with quilts. I'm a quilt designer as well, and an author and a teacher of quilting. So I have various aspects to my art practice as well as an approach to business, or several approaches maybe. And I've been working in this field for about 4.5 years now. And I come from a design background, so I studied architecture, worked in design fields and in and around design and education for my professional life up till that 4-year point. I've had kids, and I was home with a toddler and a baby, and I was thinking about going back to work. I wasn't working at the time, and I thought maybe a side hustle would be fun. And I fell upon quilting. I made a couple of quilts, so one for each baby. And then I thought that was going to be the end. But I really enjoyed my time quilting and sewing. It was kind of my own thing away from my kids. As a young mother, it's really easy to get your identity get subsumed into what you're doing day to day, feeding small children, and keeping them entertained and engaged. And so this was kind of my escape. It was the thing that was my own and nobody else's. And so I really enjoyed that kind of time. I called my studio my sanctuary, kind of a place where I could be alone with my thoughts and really just be myself. So when I was thinking about going back to work, my husband had thought about, he's like, you really enjoy quilting. Like, you could probably design patterns that people would enjoy making, because pattern designing is very similar to architecture in that you are putting together written instructions and diagrams for somebody else to create something physical. Okay. Which is what an architect does. An architect imagines something, draws up drawings and plans and verbal instructions as well, for a builder to be able to put that together, and for us to create space for people to live in and to work in and to exist in. So that seemed like a very easy. It wasn't even a leap. It was like, oh, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I joined my local chapter of the International Modern Quilt Guild, so the Maritime Modern Quilt Guild, and these were going to be my customers. So I was doing some customer research, and I found some amazing friends there. Quilters are often very generous people. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen or witnessed a quilt being made, but it takes a ton of time and a ton of energy and a ton of resources. Actually, fabric can be quite expensive. And so often, especially it's mostly women that quilt, and they are just so driven to help people. And it's pretty amazing to see such a generous spirit amongst humans. And for example, a couple months ago, I had somebody contact me who was late in her pregnancy, but she was undergoing some treatment for breast cancer. And so she asked if somebody was willing to help finish a quilt for her baby, because the baby was coming pretty soon. Mm-hmm. And so the women, a group of women in my guild, they jumped on that and got this quilt done for that baby within less than 2 weeks, I think. And she was able to take it to the hospital with her and welcome the baby in this quilt. And it was, it's pretty amazing to see. It wasn't a simple one. It had these really powerful words on it, a beautiful badass or something like that. It was really cool.
Yeah.
And so that generosity of spirit really kind of took hold of me. I was just so surprised to find these people that were so passionate about a craft and then were willing to share it with the world that way. And so they became my people, and not only my customers, but just a really encouraging group of people to be around and who really wanted to see me succeed. So I've kind of carved out a dual path, I would say. One as a person who is a quilt designer who has a business that creates quilt designs and teaches other quilters how to make things, and then also parallel to that is an art practice that I'm starting to kind of understand. I didn't go to art school, so I don't really know what that always means, but I'm starting to do a bit more experimental work thanks to a couple of grants in the last year, and I'm doing an animation project, and also doing some work with the Nova Scotia Museum collection. So a couple of more exploratory projects that wouldn't come to me in the quilting world, but I really wanted to be able to explore different facets of textile work and make my own way, I guess.
Right. So are you doing, that's an amazing story, by the way. Are you doing the illustrations for some of those as well?
For the animation or for my patterns?
Say some of your patterns or
So the patterns are all designed by me, and then I have diagrams that are illustrations that kind of step by step walk people through how to construct something. Cool. And I do all the illustrations myself. It's pretty second nature to me. And at this point, I graduated from architecture school in 2007. So, drawing diagrams is actually, I communicate better in diagrams than in words, frankly speaking.
Okay, so I mean, let's dial that back a little bit. So you went to McGill University, you graduated with architecture degree, and you have a master's of education from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. You're kind of like, I did some architecture stuff and some education stuff. But like you're legit, like you really know your stuff.
I like to think I do, but sometimes I feel like I don't know anything at all. As a children of Chinese immigrants, school education is very important. So there was no question that I was going to go to university. I again kind of fell into architecture. There was nothing at university that really piqued my interest. Science seemed too cut and dry. I didn't like reading that much, so like an arts degree seemed like that would be just really out of my comfort zone and not something I would enjoy. Business school seemed too businessy, and so architecture is by nature an interdisciplinary. It's just interdisciplinary. Everything goes in architecture: politics, economics, science, art, math. Like all of those things apply to architecture. And so this kind of this intersection of all of those things was like, I was like, I could do that. I could be interested in studying that, and including history. And I actually oddly just discovered a love for history during that degree. We happened to have a faculty that was very architectural historian heavy. So we did take a lot of history classes. I mean, they were very Western, but I appreciated where the lineage that brought us here as architects and artists and as humans. So that was, I mean, it was pivotal to my life. I think that I took that degree and started to see the world through a lens that was interdisciplinary. And that's why I went to the ed school at Harvard, because I wanted to look at how we learn when we design, because design does bring so many elements together. And so when you teach design, no matter what age you are, we don't explicitly say we teach design to kids, but we do in schools, any sort of science project or, art project, all of those, things and ways of, it's just a way of thinking actually. And so I wanted to kind of look at how we parse out all the disciplines, but how we channel them back into a single curriculum project or something like that, and see, that's how fruitful that can be for somebody to look at a problem from so many different angles and come to a solution that satisfies as much of those angles as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not clear to me what my career path was going to be after that. I knew I didn't want to be an architect outright. There are certain paths. I didn't want to design houses for rich people. That was very clear to me. Although there's a place for that and there's an importance in that. I think there's a lot of experimental work that can happen when you have a client that can afford that, and it's pretty neat to see. But I knew that I wasn't going to be that person.
Yeah.
And I knew that being able to build public projects would be very hard business-wise to handle. So I knew that after my education, I was going to be doing something that was design and education related, and putting those two things together. And so I did a random amount of things after that. I think it's part of being a millennial is you just kind of go from contract to contract. You're not looking necessarily for that permanent job right off the bat, or I wasn't anyway. I just wanted to do what I wanted to do. That sounded interesting to me. And so I worked at an architecture museum in Montreal, but in their communications department. So really kind of trying to get information that was very academic and formulate it so that it was understandable and accessible to the public. That's kind of what I was trying to do there. I was very junior. I was a kind of a junior editor for the website, a new website that we were launching. And then from there, I moved to working as an exhibit designer in a science museum. So using design to educate people about a certain topic, which was endlessly fascinating to me. I think if I were to choose another career, I would go back to doing that. I think it's so cool to understand all of this information that historians and curators and science education officers kind of put together and transform that into a physical choreographed experience. Is really, really, it's really satisfying. And so, coming up with games for people, for kids to engage in so that they can learn something, it's pretty fascinating, but not actually having to directly interface with a child. Not that I don't love kids, but it's a different skill set to be able to walk a kid through that a bit one-on-one or in a classroom, but to be able to set up something for them and set up an experience for them and then have them learn from that is pretty cool. And so that kind of spatial design I do want to get back to through my quilting. I don't know what that's going to look like, but I do love really big things. So making really big quilts would be like installation size quilts, or maybe 3D something or other would be really, it's something that I aspire to and hope that I get the chance to do in the following years.
I can't lie. I saw your work and I thought about that too. I was like, I could see this in some kind of space, and I couldn't see how, but like some giant quilt.
Yeah, and it's quilts we think of as such a domestic medium that has so much baggage in itself.
Yeah.
But I really want to push it into the public realm and see where that can go. When you actually touch a quilt, or when you start making them, you realize how strong they are, and how when you as you put thread into it, it gets more and more structural. And so I think that's really fascinating and cool. And I hope that with time, I get to explore that a bit more and, exert a quilt or several quilts out of space so that you're confronted with quilts that in a way that you haven't seen before. It's not on your bed. It's not keeping you comfortable. It's making you uncomfortable and really challenging the way you look at that medium. I think that's something I do aspire to.
How do you feel about the like you mentioned this idea of gender and like how do you feel about quilting being traditionally such a gendered media?
That is a very loaded question, and I
Mm,
don't think I've figured it all out, but I have never felt more female than I do in this path.
mm,
Um, in architecture, it's a male dominated, well, it has been traditionally a male dominated field,
yeah.
as many others are. And so I never felt, I mean, I was never confront, I don't know, until I started being on the female side of things and to find and working in this, um, in quilting, I don't know, I just never felt it. Maybe I was just blind to it or naive or something, just in terms of gender disparity throughout my entire life. But I never felt disadvantaged until I started working with textiles. And if I were to make a quilt that was bed size, let's say it's not even bed size, say it's like 60 inches by 5 feet by 5 feet,
Yeah.
um, it would not never. I hope to say that it would, but in this day and age, it would not ever sell as much as for as high a price as a painting at the same size.
Hmm. No.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, something about it being maybe people see quilts as functional or rather than artwork, which
Well,
oddly puts its value down,
yeah.
or that it's women's work. We take textiles for granted so much. Like it's the exploitative side of textiles is crazy if you think about it. Like, what am I wearing right now?
Hmm.
Um, that somebody got paid a few cents for what I'm wearing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and same with my bed covering. That was, if I think my current duvet covers from like Target. So, um, you know, somebody got also paid a few cents for me to be comfortable every single night of my life.
Mhm.
Um, and so, who if somebody's getting paid for it, but it's not
Yeah.
the person who made it.
Yeah. Well,
Um, yeah.
it. I think the gender part of it is definitely. I think you're onto something with that. I know also as someone who went through the art school route, the folks in the craft side of the building often felt like there was an undervaluing of it. It's almost like you said, because it's a functional process, it gets less cachet or less respect in a lot of ways than something that's done for purely the expressive side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that especially with quilting, because there's that generosity of quilters. Like my grandmother made this quilt for me and it was free.
Hmm.
Like she made
Yeah.
it for me, but it cost her $400 in materials and she spent like hundreds of hours on it. But like that work is not seen as creative work that is economically valuable. Um, so I think we've seen quilts as something that's so vernacular and so um, that as an art form it's tricky to make that switch. But I hope that
Yeah.
I'm hoping that changes. I think his name was the curator. His name's Adam Grayson. But he wrote an article earlier this year in January, and one of the things that I really pulled from it was that craft. He said that craft is the art world's path to diversity.
Mm.
There's no culture that is not doesn't have a textile culture.
Hmm.
We all have to be clothed.
Yeah.
We all have to be warm. Um, and women have to be clothed and men have to be clothed. And
Hmm.
so, there's no better, this is it's such a great way to access how people move through the world is through craft. Is like everybody has to do it. Everybody has a relationship to this. And so if we can see craft as that way that the art world can expand its lens and see people beyond that kind of traditional, um, those artists that come out of the academy and that are, um, treated, that are that their work is displayed in museums
Sure.
and things like that. There's work there that can be done, and I think it's going to be so valuable when we really kind of equalize the playing field again, and bring up textiles and craft to that level. I think folk art, the word folk art has kind of come to me in the last year and a half or so. Like, is what I do folk art? And I think it is. Like, it is. I didn't learn in a school. I learned from people around me, and that tradition was passed to me. I sought it out and I found it. And like, people who learn how to make things from YouTube, like, that's kind of folk art. It's weird. Yeah. It's, and so that kind of definition is kind of loosening. And I think the constraints around what is art and what is valuable art, it's constantly talked about. It has been for ages, but it's got a new, I think it's got a new slant now that we've got so much access to informing ourselves, or like educating ourselves about how to make things and how to be artists. And yeah, it's wow. It's like, I haven't figured it all out at all. I'm just kind of tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely. I was curious how that worked for you, because I mean, like you said, it's a time-consuming process. I'm assuming people get like a one-off piece from you if you do a commission for them.
Yeah.
And, you know, as someone who's in the painting side of it, and I'm watching, unfortunately, I haven't achieved some of the status of some of my colleagues, but you see, like, a one-off, for instance, a Basquiat recently just is predicted to go for auction at $10 million. It's a painting. Like, it may not have taken as long as your quilted piece, but it's like almost this, if it's the art value is so much based on perception, more so than other things. So it's very interesting. I think if you position one of your quilts in a certain way, it automatically now increases its value a certain amount, right?
And it depends who buys it. I think it's weird, because I recently worked on a commission for an architect, and it hasn't, the project that it's going to be in is not finished yet. So I hope to have photos sometime this summer. But I think that somehow that makes it more valuable than if, like, I don't know, Joe Schmo bought it, and I can't photograph it in that kind of space that's contemporary and clean. And I can the clients that I can get after this will be different than if Joe Schmo bought it and then I never saw it again. So I don't know. I don't really, the business of art buying is not one that I'm familiar with yet, but I enjoy it when somebody pays me for my work. I'm happy to do that, especially if it's a project that really speaks to me. Yeah.
So Andrea, how have you been coping through the pandemic and the social uprising and all of that stuff? Has your business been affected in any way? And like, how are you just personally feeling?
I have found it really tough. I would say that out of the gate, I was like, I am totally on top of this pandemic. Like, I'm ready for you. My kids are on a schedule, and they left me alone for a few hours in the morning for me to be able to work. And then, we would do something in the afternoon. That lasted 3 to 5 weeks maybe. And then it all kind of crumbled. I think that, disruption after disruption, I've kind of felt like that I've been like punched several times in a row.
Yeah.
I think the pandemic was one thing. I didn't realize this until a couple months in, but how much of my creative energy or creative momentum had just gone kaput. Even moving from 5 or 6 hours a day on weekdays when the kids were at school to just a couple of hours, there's this focus that I could not ever achieve. Have not been able to achieve because I have like an hour here, half an hour there. But I have to like keep on top of my email. So that's another half an hour there and things like that. And just being exhausted kind of at the end of the day. I know some parents work at night and I just can't even fathom that anymore. Maybe I'm just too old for that. But, but I like it. You know, I was working on these kind of experimental projects in January and February, and they were like moving along and I was feeling excited about them. And then I had to set them aside and kind of get the family machine working. Even like though my husband is home as well and he's doing just as much as I am with the kids, it was really, it's just been hard. So I turned to things that I knew how to create. So, you know, creating a pattern or like creating a quilt from a pattern, doing easier things was really, was fulfilling for me because like, yeah, I can do this. I can totally do this. And then I had to write a new pattern and that was right around when, it was right after George Floyd got murdered. And I made so many mistakes. I was so surprised at how many mistakes I made. I was just so, I couldn't focus. And I was like, what's wrong with me? Like, I don't understand. Like, this is not extremely difficult work. It's, you know, it takes some brains, but like, I can do this. Like, you know,
you're a master at this point, so it should be easy.
Yeah. So I think that emotional side, I think that really hit, I think, especially with Black Lives Matter, it kind of to a lesser extent, but it's still kind of emotionally really hard was when with the Nova Scotia mass shootings in April.
Yeah.
That emotional toil, it's kind of new to me, which sounds really weird as a 37-year-old that I'm like, oh, I have emotions, like, and that affects how I work. Seems a little silly. But it really kind of it hit me harder than I really expected, and it's been a struggle for sure. And I think that, you know, my focus at first was on the kids, and then moving through was like, where do I fit into all of this as a non-Black, non-Indigenous person of color? What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? What am I supposed to know? Because I have been shielded quite a bit from, you know, I fit that like model minority myth type person. Like I've fit all the things. I've checked all the boxes. I've done all the things that society tells me I should have done, and I've done those. And I stay quiet when I'm supposed to stay quiet. And it's going to be a journey for the rest of my life to figure out what my position is and what, in terms of what I'm supposed to do and say and act. I know that my circle of influence, you know, immediately is my kids, and then beyond that, how that ripples. I know there's a strain of me genetically. Actually, my grandmother is like this. My mom, to a certain extent, too. Very outspoken. I just don't know what I'm supposed to say. I can once I know what I'm supposed to say, I have no problem saying it. It's just, you know, there's this like part of me that knows I know how to be outspoken, but I'm like, what am I supposed to say? So that process of figuring out what my role is going to be an ongoing long process that I'm willing to do, but it's work that will either shift my focus in my artistic work, or my artistic work will have to not suffer but be a little sidelined for as a consequence. But it's really important and I had the privilege of being able to kind of set aside some of my work to be able to focus on that. So yeah, there's just I from the beginning of this pandemic have realized how much privilege we have as a family to be able to navigate through this pandemic. I just didn't see how much it was tied to my race and my husband's race.
Interesting.
Yeah. And, my kids are mixed race, and, but they probably will, they'll either be seen as model minorities or white. So what they need to do, and the way that they will need to move aside for other people to have their voices heard and to amplify other people around them, is something that I was never really taught or know how to teach. So, we've got a few years still to kind of help mold them and shape them into those people that are being like, yeah, sure, I could be the CEO of this company, but I want this person instead to be the CEO of this company because I think that's right and just. Yeah, so I don't know. It's very complicated, and yeah, I'm in it for the marathon.
And to me, honestly, I think that is the right approach, because I think a lot of people have raced to say, well, why can't I do right now? Which is great. Things should happen right now, but also the right things need to happen. And I do agree that like it's a long term thing, because like now you're saying like I'm gonna constantly be reflective of how certain things happen and how certain things play out. And it is something that you kind of have to like be taught early on as a Black person. I remember, I don't know if I've told the story on the show before, but like my parents getting pissed at me. But my mom reminded me of this the other day. She's like, remember when you told me that racism doesn't affect Black people in the same way as it used to? And I was like, yeah, I know. So it's like, it's just important to like always kind of keep in mind, like, oh, why was a certain decision made, and why did this thing happen, and what's really going on behind the scenes. Like you kind of always have to be aware of these different things. And to be honest as well, even though I'm Black, sometimes I get a little bit of a benefit of the model minority, being that I'm an immigrant,
Mm-hmm.
because I found that sometimes uh, when I'm compared to, and look, this is only my perception, me just watching things. So I can't say that this is exactly happening for sure, but I've heard people talk down on certain Black communities when they find out that I'm from away.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, so that's how you really feel? Okay. It makes you think that like, it's like, oh, you're not like the others, you're different, and it's not okay either. So I know we just have a lot of work to do, and it's not going to be something that happens quickly or easily. And sometimes I'm not even sure if yeah, I don't know. I don't really have the answers yet either, but it's going to be a long time.
Yeah, I think that being from away as well is, even though it's just like from another province, I don't know anything about, like, I didn't know anything about the historic Black communities here in Nova Scotia. I didn't learn that in school. I didn't learn that in Ontario when I was growing up, that, like slavery was something that happened like in the United States, and like, Canada welcomed slaves here. And, that's what I knew about historic, like that was what Canadian history and Blackness was about. That was what I understood.
Yeah.
Whereas when I came here, I was like, oh, this is different. That Black people have been oppressed in Canada, in Nova Scotia, for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And I've started to see it, and I was like, oh, I like racism is not a thing of the past. And I think I was blinded to it for so long that when I was at Harvard for a year, I was, it was just a year for my master's, and there was like a alumni of color group, and like things that were specifically, I don't know if there was a Black, like a group for for African Americans and Blacks. But I was like, why are there these groups? Like, why do we need these groups? And I'm only starting to understand. That was like 10 years ago.
Right.
And, I'm only starting to understand that, oh yeah, they need places to be. We need places that the society needs places for Black people to be Black and be safe in that and be able to not be scared and say what they think and be themselves and not have to put on this facade of like, I have to act a certain way in this white institution. And yeah, I can't believe that it took me this long to understand that, but I see the value of those spaces now, and I'm really wanting to learn how to build those spaces in my community. And quilting is insanely white. Like, it's just, especially the people with the power and the money, like the people who own the companies that make fabric, and have the big empires. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. The people that have that money are mainly white, and often men actually at the helms of these companies. And
whoa, that says a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's changing now, but I was like I've always held the industry at arm's length because it's felt so exploitative. You get paid a couple $100, maybe if you're lucky, to make something, and that gets a little bit of exposure. I think this is kind of the artist's plight, right? You're like, you're like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing that's taking me several hours for some minor exposure or some exposure of some sort. So I've always kind of treaded carefully around those and don't take on things that I'm not getting paid for. And so I don't know, I haven't really jumped in so deeply because I've always felt a little bit like, this is really unfair. The creative people don't get compensated, and then the people who like move around the fabric, like the middleman gets paid just so much more. But I haven't reconciled, like, that's kind of business. Like, business can be like that. Doesn't have to be and shouldn't be. So I'm trying to like figure out where I want to be, and I think that I've come to the realization that I do belong there. I just don't know where I fit yet. So that, again, will take a few more years, I think, to figure that out. And I'm really happy to be part of the Nova Scotia arts community. And I didn't really jump in until pretty recently, in the last year and a half or 2 years, I would say. Because I didn't go to NASCAD. I didn't go to art school here. And I knew that my audience for quilting was kind of everywhere. It was more global than just here. So I kind of chased after the global, like a broader audience. But I'm just so thankful for the supports that are here in Nova Scotia for artists. I've been able to lean on those supports and like learn how to write a grant properly, and a grant application, learn how to price my work, learn from mentors. I have a mentor right now. I'm part of the Visual Arts Nova Scotia mentorship program this year. So Frances Dorsey is my mentor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, she's absolutely wonderful and so insightful, and in an instant kind of see right through me, which is pretty cool. And so, the supports here are pretty phenomenal. I don't know, I'm just dipping my toe into it right now, but I feel like your voice can be heard here in a way that in a larger province, there's just so many more voices competing for airtime, that I'm really thankful to be here, to be able to kind of cultivate what I have to say and then kind of mold that and shape that as I move along on this journey.
Yeah, shout out to Visual Arts Nova Scotia, actually. I agree. Even though I went to NASCAD and technically makes me part of the creative establishment, I always felt like an outsider, so I never really dipped my toes fully into the creative scene here until more or less recently, and I'm still not really in there yet. I kind of created my own lane, I guess,
Hmm.
but I really want to work on mixing what I do with what everyone else does. Because like you're right, it's the community here is so vibrant. It's crazy, and you can like I used to actually I wanted to live in Toronto, and then I was like I made the decision to stay here inevitably, ultimately, but and it struck me that yeah, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the visibility in Toronto that I got here in a relatively short time. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's a pretty special place. I'm really happy that we moved here, and yeah, it's been 8 years almost that we've lived in Nova Scotia, and I've built my work and my art practice here. Um, and it's really cool to see what other people are doing here. And there's a level of innovation here. Um, I don't know. It's just a really vibrant place to be, and the smallness of it really does let your voice be heard and amplify the people around you. It's pretty neat to see. Um, yeah, and yeah.
Yeah. So with your work, what what sort of influenced you in a sense to go the direction that you went? Was there a specific thing per se?
Um, I think that yeah, I think that there was that moment when I joined the Modern Quilt Guild.
Mm,
I was I was like, oh, I found what quilting can look like. So, the modern quilting movement is something that was birthed kind of in the late, like 2008, 2009 ish.
mhm,
And it was established, the Modern Quilt Guild was established in California at that time and has spread across the world. But seeing quilts as modern is something that I was like, oh yeah, like I could. That's what I want to do with quilting. Is the people like there are people doing that already, and it's it's part of this group of well now that the guild is like 12,000 members across the world, but um that was a moment where I was like, I have a voice here, and I think I have something to say through this medium.
mhm,
I just, I'm figuring it out as I go, and
yeah,
like many others. Um, and I think that people they always have an idea of what quilting is, and it always is the same. It's like it's like grandmothers and bonnets
right.
around a quilting frame at a like church or charity quilting bee, and they're all like working on this quilt together. Um, and to kind of shatter that perception that like not quilting is relevant today, and people do it in a way that's relevant to today's world.
Mhm,
There are, I mean, quilts have always been political, but quilts continue to be political, and say things that it's actually quite jarring to see like a gun on a quilt. Um,
mhm,
but people like that's how you can use this medium to express something. Something that's like quiet and pretty and beautiful and on your bed is like, no, there's a gun on there, and
yeah,
it's on the wall, and so this piece of art is saying that like anti-black racism and violence is wrong. Like,
mhm,
um, there are things you can say in quilting. I mean, you can say it in any medium, but it's like this soft domestic medium is saying very powerful things. Is pretty awesome. And so yeah, that was the moment. I think that was in 2016. I realized that I'm part of a larger thing, that quilting doesn't have to look like what people think it looks like, um, and it's part of a vibrant community that is moving the medium forward, and I think changing the way we it's contributing to change in a positive way and moving society forward. So that I would totally get on board with. I think that I think people also don't really know what design is, and that's always kind of driven me too. Is that like people think designers make things really pretty and beautiful for us to enjoy, and that's never been the way I view design. Design is to like improve people's quality of life. To like there's a more progressive. It's like we don't make things pretty.
No,
like that's
it's a
not our number one
rigorous
function.
process.
Yeah, and it's like we make society function. Like where I place this building, from like the distance from between the building and the sidewalk is important in the way that people will navigate through their city. Or like, you know, like there's like things like that. It's not just like, oh, I made this, like it's a beautiful finish, it's got like this marble floor, and you know, it's not that. And so I think that quilting is the same. Like people think that quilts should be pretty and you know, edify your life that way. It's beautifying my life, but that's not the way I see it.
No, I agree. Even on the graphic design side, you know, when I went to NASCAD, obviously it's an art school. That's what it's known for, but it's also a design school and craft school. And I was struck by the number of students I met who were fantastic designers, but didn't identify as artists at all. Could not draw, could not, you know, but what they had is the ability to problem solve, and they just chose the visual medium to do so. And there is a lot of rigor in the design process that people just don't understand or acknowledge a lot of times, because I mean, for better or for worse, you know, a lot of these shows, I used to love America's Next Top Model, because not so much because of the models, but because it was bringing design to the forefront. And I liked, uh, you know, Project Runway and all that kind of stuff, and all the home decor shows. But where they lose me is they very much do what you just said, where they simplify design in a way that makes people understand it, which is great, makes people like it, but it takes away some of the I don't know, it's not as easy as the experts on the shows make it look sometimes.
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, it took me a long time to also think of myself as an artist. Like it took me a couple years to be like, okay, now I'm going to add that to my bio. I felt very comfortable calling myself a designer because that's what I've been trained to do. And,
Yeah.
and so, and it's still foggy, definitions for sure.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, I think that artists do the same thing and they problem solve and they come at it probably similarly to designers. Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. Calling myself an artist was really, really difficult to be like, oh yes, I can take on that moniker and feel like that's actually authentic. But it was difficult at first. Yeah, designers, it's just like it seems more clear. Here's a problem, and you can solve it.
Yes.
Whereas artists is just it's more of an open field. You're like, well, is there a problem, and can I create a problem for myself to solve, or is there a problem that I do want to solve through art? And so, I am constantly navigating between the two, and it's maybe I'm just both, and that's fine, and I don't have to separate it out so starkly.
Honestly, I'm in the same boat. I started on the art side first and then became a designer. And then I had this moment where I was like, am I an artist or am I a designer? Am I both? What am I? Like, because you know, society wants you to pick. So
Yeah.
And then even like coming up with the name Art Pays Me and deciding who the brand was going to speak for, and then later who the podcast would feature. And then ultimately I decided to go with art in the most broadest possible sense. But yeah, like sometimes And yeah, in that sense, the way I'm looking at art is that it doesn't have to be defined as one thing or another. It literally could be design as well. It could be something else. Um, but you're right. Artists are tasked to solve problems. It's I guess the way the problem is framed.
Hmm.
Yeah, are you creating the problem yourself? Is there a client, or is there, some other constraint, a social issue, for instance?
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, design seems more comfortable to me because somebody gives me a problem. I don't have to define that problem myself. I mean, they can hand me a problem,
Yes.
and I can look at all the facets of it and be like, okay, here's some more problems. But it's just it's more clear. And
Hmm.
being an artist is so much looser, and it's so open. Like, it's scary. I think that one of the my biggest fears is a blank canvas. Um, and I mean, I don't work with canvases, but if I was a painter, maybe. But it's like, okay, well, I've kind of defined my process as that. Like, I have a blank canvas, but I'm going to start adding problems so that I'm constraining myself, um, so that I can do the creative work. I know one of the kind of main lessons that I learned in architecture school was like, constraints make your work better. They make they make design better. They make like architects and designers work to find a solution around these constraints, and it makes your design richer. And so when I'm faced with no constraints at all, it's like the scariest thing. And
Hmm.
so I start throwing things on that canvas that become my constraints. And once I find kind of the complexity there, uh, then I can start to do the work. But I know some people love a blank canvas and they can just like throw paint on there and figurative paint in my circumstance, but in my field. But I just can't do it. I have to start to constrain myself, and so that I can act, so that becomes the conduit for my work, is to solve the problems that I've put on the canvas myself.
Yeah, that works the same way for me too. I can't. It's terrifying for me to see a blank piece of paper, a blank canvas, whatever. I have to have something, whether it's a color palette, whether it's something to say you're not allowed to do this thing before you go forward, and it has to be about this. And it's like, all right, okay, I got you.
Yeah, it's so comforting to be like, yeah, I've been baby's put in a corner. That's so comfortable. I love it.
Yeah, I remember like the first time I decided to pursue individual creative projects. Uh, because I was a graphic designer immediately after I graduated NASCAD, and I went years working with clients. Decided to take clients away and do independent projects, and was like, damn, what do I actually want to create? I don't even know. All this time I was mad at clients for taking my creative freedom from me and yada yada yada. Now I have it. I don't know what I want to do. So
Yeah. It's a funny paradox.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so Andrea, like, what is there one piece of advice you would give someone who was pursuing a creative pursuit? What would that be?
Um, Following your heart is kind of bogus. That's what I would say, and it's just do the work. Like, I think that um, if you not put your head down and like close your eyes to everything else, but you got to do the work and do it over and over and over again. I struggle with this all the time. Maybe because I probably time is my excuse that I use, but
Mm,
there's this one project that I'm working on, and I finally found it's actually cut up wedding dresses that I'm patching back together. And um, I've only had the opportunity to do it once, and I know that I need to do it 5 or 10 more times for me to understand how the material works, what I want to say with those materials, and how I want to mount those works, kind of thing. And I think if you're a young artist and the constraints on your time are not great. Let's say you have, I mean, that this is all relative, but just constantly do the work. Like, be disciplined and do it. And I think that you'll find what you have to say and how you want to say it. And that's going to be a continual process that you'll do over and over and over again. But if you're willing to do the work, I think that you'll be able to. And I don't mean that in a like a cliche kind of way, like you'll find a way. But I think just showing up and doing it, just do the work.
Sure.
Is very, very key to being an artist.
I agree. Take that time when you have it.
Yeah. If you're 22 and you want to be an artist, like being disciplined and taking advantage of that time that you do have. I feel like I threw away my young adulthood.
I do too. And I try not to think about it too much because it pisses me off.
Like, what was I doing? Why did I think I was so busy? I don't really know. So, take advantage of time when you have it.
Yeah. Every time I see a young hotshot come up and they've been grinding so hard, and I'm like, man, that could have been me if I just was paying attention. Oh boy. So Andrea, how can people find you online?
My website is thirdstoryworkshop.com, 3RD storyworkshop.com. It's actually, I've recently split it into two. So when you go there, you can find my artist website. So you'll see Andrea Tsang Jackson Artist, or you'll see Modern Quilt Patterns and Resources. And that's for quilters. So you can choose which side you want to look at, or you can look at both. And then on Instagram, I'm at Third Story Workshop. And Twitter, I'm not very active on Twitter, but _. And I think that's probably it. You can find me any of those ways. I have a Facebook page too, which is Third Story Workshop.
Well, Andrea, thank you for doing Art Pays Me. This was a pleasure. And I'm honored to have you on the show. You've been covered by a lot of great media that I respect, and your work is fantastic. And I wish you great success in the future.
Thanks a lot, Dwayne. Hope we cross paths very soon in real life.
In real life, right? Imagine that. Thank you so much for listening to the Art Pays Me podcast. Thank you to Langy Beats for the theme music. If you got anything out of this show, please rate, review, and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. The more you do this, the more reach the podcast gets, and the more artists I can help learn to make a living at what they love. If you want to know more about what I do, hit me up at artpaysme.com or at artpaysme on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest. See y'all next time.